Never mess with a country's morning routine. Ottoman leaders learned that the hard way, and some of them lost their heads over it, literally. One ruler used to walk the streets at night with a 100-pound sword, looking for people drinking a certain drink in public so he could execute them on the spot. That drink is sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now. Today we're talking about coffee and the wild, violent, almost unbelievable journey it took to end up in your cup every single morning. This isn't just a plant that people started drinking one day and everybody loved it right away. This is a story with smugglers, secret agents, death sentences, holy blessings, mystics chasing God through a coffee cup, and entire empires trying to control a bean that grows on a bush. By the end of this video, you're going to look at your coffee maker completely differently. Let's go back to where this whole thing started, because the origin story alone is already strange. Coffee comes from Ethiopia, from the highlands, where the plant grew wild for centuries. From there, it crossed the Red Sea into Yemen. But here's the part most people never hear. The first people to actually drink coffee on purpose, night after night, weren't traders or farmers. They were mystics. Sufi monks, sometime around the 1400s, discovered that this bitter little brew could keep them wide awake through their nighttime prayer rituals, sessions that could stretch on for hours, sometimes all night long, filled with chanting, repetition, and meditation. Coffee gave them the focus and the stamina to push through. And they didn't treat it like a simple energy drink either. Some Sufi scholars at the time described the state coffee helped them reach with a phrase that basically translates to the joy of the people of God, the feeling of touching hidden mysteries. They even gave the caffeine buzz its own name, a word that roughly means the euphoria of the drink. This wasn't just a beverage to them, it was a spiritual tool, a way to physically hold the door open to the divine a little longer each night. That's the worship part of our story. But it's exactly that power, the power to keep people awake, focused, and talking, that turned coffee into something a lot of rulers found terrifying. From Yemen, coffee reached Mecca, one of the most important religious and trading cities in the entire world. And this timing matters a lot because Mecca was packed with pilgrims, scholars, and traders passing through constantly. So when coffee showed up there, it didn't stay quiet for long. People started gathering in these new spaces called coffee houses. And these weren't just places to grab a drink. They were where people talked, where they debated religion, politics, business, gossip, everything. Coffee kept the conversation going for hours. It sounds harmless. It was anything but, because throughout history, there's one thing that makes people in power extremely nervous. Crowds of awake, alert, talkative citizens exchanging ideas. And that's exactly where the trouble begins. In the year 1511, a local governor in Mecca named Khair Beg walked past a group of men drinking coffee outside a mosque. According to several historical accounts, he found them suspicious, maybe even a little disrespectful, so he put coffee itself on trial. Literally. He organized a hearing where a basket of coffee beans sat on one side of the room, accused of making people lose control of themselves and lose sight of their faith. The coffee obviously had no way to defend itself. Khair Beg ruled against it. Coffee houses across Mecca were shut down. Drinking coffee in public became illegal. But here's the twist historians point out. The religious explanation might not have been the real reason. Some records suggest Khair Beg had just discovered that people were using these same coffee houses to gossip about him and spread criticism of his rule. So the ban wasn't really about faith. It was about control. It was about shutting down the one place where regular people could speak freely. And it didn't work. The ban barely lasted a few weeks before a higher authority in Cairo overturned it, and Khair Beg eventually lost his position entirely. Coffee wasn't going anywhere. If anything, this first attempt to kill it off just proved how powerful it already was. That should have been the end of the story, a small local drama that fizzled out fast. Instead, it was only the beginning of a much bigger problem, because coffee didn't just spread. It spread everywhere, and every single empire it touched had to figure out what to do with it. By the mid-1500s, coffee had reached Cairo, then Damascus, then Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Coffee houses opened by the hundreds. In Cairo alone, one record puts the number at over 600 coffee houses running at the same time. These places became the internet of their era. You wanted the news, you wanted business connections, you wanted political gossip, you went to the coffee house. And this is where things get genuinely dangerous, because a full century after that first failed ban in Mecca, one Ottoman Sultan decided enough was enough. His name was Murad IV, and he ruled in the early 1600s. Murad didn't just dislike coffee, he became obsessed with wiping it out completely. He believed coffee houses were breeding grounds for rebellion. And honestly, given what we just talked about, he wasn't entirely wrong. His solution, though, was brutal beyond belief. He made public coffee drinking punishable by death. And according to multiple historical accounts, he would disguise himself as an ordinary commoner, walk the streets of Istanbul at night, carrying a massive sword reportedly weighing around 100 pounds. And if he caught someone drinking coffee in public, he would execute them right there on the spot. Sit with that for a second. People were losing their lives over a warm drink that keeps you a little more awake in the morning. But even under that level of terror, coffee refused to die. People kept drinking it in secret. They found ways around the enforcement. And after Murad's reign ended, the crackdowns eventually eased. Later, Ottoman leaders were far less violent about it, usually just handing out a light beating for a first offense instead of a death sentence, which honestly says a lot about how far things had escalated before that started sounding lenient. So if coffee kept surviving every single attempt to erase it, why did people fight so hard to control it in the first place? The answer isn't really about the drink at all. It's about money. For roughly 200 years, the entire global coffee trade ran through one single port, Mocha in Yemen. If you wanted coffees anywhere in the world, it came from there, and only from there. And the people controlling that trade were determined to keep it that way forever. Their method was almost sinister in how simple it was. Before any coffee beans left the region, they were boiled or roasted just enough to make them completely infertile, dead on arrival. You could brew them, you could drink them, you could sell them, but you could never ever plant them and grow your own supply. It was a monopoly protected by biology itself. This is where our next character enters the story. And honestly, he might be the most important person in this entire history that almost nobody's ever heard of. His name was Baba Budan, a Sufi pilgrim from India traveling to Mecca sometime in the early 1600s. While he was there, he became completely captivated by coffee, and he realized something. If he could just get his hands on live, fertile seeds that hadn't been boiled or roasted, he could break Yemen's entire monopoly wide open. So he did something incredibly risky. According to the legend, he smuggled 7 raw coffee seeds out of the region by strapping them directly to his stomach, hidden under his clothing, walking straight past the very people whose entire job was to prevent exactly that. 7 seeds. That's it. That's the entire founding stock. He carried them back to India and planted them in the hills of Karnataka, in a region that today is literally named Baba Budangiri in his honor. From those 7 smuggled seeds, an entire coffee growing region was born, one that still produces coffee to this day. One man, one risky decision, and centuries of carefully guarded monopoly just cracked open. And once that crack appeared, it never closed again. Dutch traders got their hands on live coffee plants and began growing it in their own colonies, eventually establishing massive plantations in places like Ceylon and Java, which is exactly why some people still call coffee Java to this day. French colonists smuggled coffee seedlings across the ocean to the Caribbean. One famous account describes a single coffee tree surviving a brutal voyage to Martinique through storms and near starvation, only making it because the man transporting it reportedly gave up part of his own water ration to keep the plant alive. Meanwhile, coffee was making its way into Europe, and Europe had its own complicated relationship with the drink. Christian leaders, wary of anything tied so closely to the Islamic world, started calling coffee the devil's drink, and some pushed hard for it to be banned outright. But the story goes that Pope Clement VIII decided to try it himself before making a final call. And according to the legend, after tasting it, he basically said it would be a shame to let outsiders have this drink all to themselves, and joked that he'd baptize it instead, turning it into a proper Christian beverage. Whether that exact quote is real or slightly polished over the years, the outcome was very real. Coffee got the church's blessing, and that single decision may have cleared the path for it to spread across Catholic Europe without the religious backlash it easily could have faced. From there, coffee houses exploded across England, France, Germany, and Holland. In England, specifically, these places earned a nickname that tells you everything about how people saw them: penny universities. For the price of one single penny, you could sit down, drink your coffee, and take part in real intellectual conversation with strangers. Something that used to be reserved almost entirely for the wealthy. Coffee genuinely helped democratize public discussion in a way beer halls never really managed to do, mostly because, well, Coffee doesn't get you drunk. Not everyone was thrilled about this shift, though. By the late 1600s in England, coffee houses had become so popular that men were spending entire days there instead of at home. And in 1674, a group of women actually published something called the Women's Petition Against Coffee, essentially begging their husbands to come home instead of debating politics over endless cups of coffee until all hours of the night. And maybe that's the part of this story that hits closest to home, because in a strange way, we never really stopped worshiping it. Your brain still reacts to caffeine almost exactly like those Sufi monks' brains did 500 years ago. It blocks the chemical in your body that normally tells you you're getting tired, so your brain just keeps pushing forward, alert, focused, wired. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual mechanism sitting behind every single cup you drink today. The ritual just changed shape. Instead of chanting through the night in a monastery, we've got a line outside a coffee shop every single morning before work, almost on autopilot, treating that first cup with something that honestly looks a lot like devotion. So here's where we land. A drink that started out as a spiritual tool for mystics chasing God through the night, got put on trial in Mecca, banned by religious leaders, hunted down with an actual sword by a sultan who executed people over it, and smuggled out of its homeland, strapped to a pilgrim's stomach, ended up becoming one of the single most normal, everyday things a human being can do. You wake up, you make a cup of coffee, and you don't think twice about it. But every time you do that, you're quietly continuing a tradition that people once risked and lost their lives for. A tradition that survived executions, boiled beans, papal debate, and centuries of empires trying to keep it locked away. Coffee didn't spread because it was allowed to. It spread because no ban, no death penalty, and no monopoly could actually stop people from wanting it. So next time you're standing in line waiting for your order, remember, you're holding on to something that used to be worth smuggling across an ocean and worth staying up all night praying over. What do you think? Was Baba Budan a hero? Or was he basically the world's first coffee thief? Let me know in the comments. And if you like digging into the real story behind the things you consume every single day, hit subscribe.